Hello and welcome to Indy Talks, the monthly television interview show brought to you by the Hudson Independent newspaper in Tarrytown. We have as a guest this morning Drew Fixell, the mayor of Tarrytown, New York, I believe in his 7th term, 13th year as mayor of Tarrytown. It's a lot of years to put in.
Yeah.
How many of those did you have people actually running against you?
I think approximately half, but of the elections.
But not recently.
Last time, no.
Oh, right.
Time before, perhaps.
Okay.
I think we had a third party, possibly. It's been so long that
But no serious threat.
it hasn't. Yeah, I guess we've won by substantial margins when we've had opponents.
Let me start with a topic that seems to be a buzz in the village right now,
Right.
which is the sudden appearance
Yes.
of a very large cell phone tower
Right. Yep.
down near the railroad tracks that people in the area are complaining is ruining their view.
Yep.
What do you know about this? How did it happen? And what is the
Right.
village's position on it?
Well, first of all, the village's position, we would like it to disappear, certainly. What we've been able to recreate, when somebody called me up a little over a week ago on a Saturday night and said, "What's this thing appearing?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And then she said, "It's a cell phone tower." I said, "Oh my God, 2 or 3 years ago, we had heard they had done, they were thinking about doing this and that there was some activity regarding it. And then I haven't heard a thing since 2000. It turns out it's 2015, and we've recreated we've tried to recreate what we can of what took place.
And they is Metro North?
Metro North.
Right.
Metro North in conjunction with a private company, which it was at the time called Parallel Communications, and I think they were merged with another company now. I'm not even sure the current name. But so in the summer of 2015, the village received some notification from Parallel and or the MTA, I'm not sure which one it was, that they were planning to do this. And during that, so from I think it was late July through sometime in August, the village administrator at the time, Mike Blau, who's no longer, he's retired, he started working on this. He clearly, as far as we can remember, he told the board about it, and there was some residents who had picked it up in the area of the neighborhood above.
Mm-hmm.
A man named Len Cardillo, who was apparently moved from the village, and he was notifying trustees and the administrator that he saw this notice that was coming, and that it was going to be a terrible thing. So, from what I can recreate, apparently Mike Blau went to the MTA, said, we don't want this is not a great idea. They said, you have no control over it, and they cited aspects of the law and precedent that supported their position. And then in late August, Mike wrote a small article on the website describing what had taken place and what was planned to be, that they were going to do this, and that we checked with the attorneys and we wrote to them, and they said we don't have control over it, which we don't have direct control at all. Sometime after that, within weeks, I think, Mike, and as well as the resident, apparently filed some sort of complaint with the FCC, which governs these things, which seemed to have focused primarily on historic sites that were nearby, and again, it wasn't something that came actively before the board and me, so I'm not exactly sure what happened, but it appears from the things I read that they must have figured out that their best possible line of attack was historic sites. And so they noted these historic sites that are nearby, and it went to the FCC.
What would be the historic sites?
I think there were 10 on the list, which included Lyndhurst, the Pearson School, Sunnyside, I can't remember all of them, but, and actually, notably, the Tarrytown train station is a historic site, although it is owned by the MTA. And also, apparently, the MTA had not noted the Tarrytown train station in whatever it had submitted along the way. So it went to the FCC, and then we haven't heard anything since that point.
So this is like a couple of years ago.
This is 3 years ago. This is 3 years ago. It turns out that the Rich got an email that said the FCC, in March of this year.
Rich meaning
Rich
Slinger.
Slinger, the current administrator, who wasn't there at the time and wasn't really up on this, and nobody had really thought about it since then. I mean, actually, one of the things I remember saying at the time, when we first heard about it, I remember saying to Mike Blau, why don't they put this on, why don't they put the antenna? Because it was about an antenna, not about a giant monopole. That was, apparently, the idea was that they needed an antenna for the police communication purposes.
Metro North.
Metro
Police.
North, right, Metro North Police. So I remember saying, why don't you ask them to put it on the bridge? Why do they have to build the tower here? And at some point, not that I have a distinct recollection, the answer came back, they're not interested in doing that. And
not that they couldn't, that they just weren't.
well, we don't really know.
Yeah.
I mean, they really, the response we got in sort of what was described by Mike in the article he wrote on our website was that they basically told us, you have no jurisdiction, you have no control over it, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so from a legal perspective, that does appear to be largely the case, at least at this point. So for 3 years, or 2.5 years, nothing happened as far as we knew. And then, but apparently in March of this year, the FCC issued a ruling that said, tough, you don't have, you have no claim here. Actually, the resident at the time, he also filed along with the village. And the decision came back, which we've now seen, that the FCC said there's not enough here, you can't, they can go ahead and build their thing. Turns out, Richard got an email that said, here's a decision. He didn't really realize what it was, apparently. And we hadn't heard anything until last week. There was another notice in August, which is they note this in the article in the Journal News. Said, well, we notified the village in August. Well, the notice in August was something along the lines of an email that Rich got, again, which said, sometime next month we're going to build this. So the upshot is that the Saturday last, not this past weekend, up appeared this pole.
It went up really fast.
Yeah, and apparently one day, from what I understand. Nobody knew when, nobody knew what. Now the thing that's been noted now, which is perhaps an opening, is that they sited it incredibly close to Franklin Courts, the affordable low-income housing project, 30 feet from their playground apparently, and probably 50 feet from some of the buildings, which I think is that people have read, that if it were subject to our regulation, there's a 150-foot fall zone in our code, which says you have to set back 150, well, for that it would be 150 feet. It's whatever the structure, if it fell over, it can't hit anything. It has to be set back further than if it fell. So it could not have been built where it was built if it was subject to our rules. But they're not subject to our rules. The MTA can basically do whatever it pleases on its property, and this is built on its property. However, what we're going to look into, and I don't know what the answer will be, is whether or not there are other rules, not ours, that talk of this, and with reference to a federally supported housing project, and whether they can just sort of do what they want without regard to this. It doesn't seem to have been raised at any point. I'm not sure that Mike Blau or the resident who was involved at the time even realized how close it would be.
They didn't know they had that weapon in their arsenal.
Well, if it's a weapon. That's the thing, is we don't even know if it is a weapon, but clearly from a moral suasion point of view, it's a weapon. And so we are certainly notifying, and we've been talking to Avenante, we have calls into Audrey Stewart-Cousins, we've contacted the governor's office, and apparently they're taking a look at this, that it's now risen up. And this seems to be, whether it's legally an issue or not, there certainly is a moral issue of placing this next to a housing project and basically on top of a playground. It just seems like a really bad idea from so many perspectives. So we're going after it as best we can. We'll see where we can go. I mean, the question is, do they really even need to have this? Was it not possible to site the antenna somewhere else? I mean, one of the things we've seen is, and it was actually noted by Mike 2-3 years ago, was that their plan was to sell space on the pole as well. So there's also a revenue angle to this from their point of view. which if they co-located their antenna on some other site, they obviously wouldn't get the revenue. So
So the
sort of
battle-
stay tuned. We don't know. Yeah,
continues,
we
right?
don't know what form it's going to take. Obviously, we've opened up the lines of communication to try and get this undone in some fashion. What that would mean again remains. It's difficult to see how you could move the tower somewhere that would really be acceptable. Really, the answer, it seems to me, would likely be you find a location to either locate the antenna, not the tower, and you know, in some other place where there are other antennas, or where it would be sitting on top of people where they live and kids play. So that's what we're, and look, they built it, they can take it down. I mean, obviously they're not going to want to, I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's, it's not going to be that easy to do, I don't think. But,
once it's up, it's up.
right, and they have some sort of contract with this provider, I'm sure. Which, so it'll be a process, no doubt. But it seems that we have good allies on our side, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, asking the governor for help in an election year is probably good timing.
Yeah, and we should anyway, because
Right.
it is, the MTA is a
Right.
state agency, in which, he controls the largest number of seats on the board, so, though there are others on the board, he's the primary, the governor's office is the primary body that influences the MTA. I think they exist technically as an independent agency. I don't think he can literally order them to do things, but they certainly influence what goes on at the MTA.
So we'll be writing about this in the Hudson
I'm
Independent
sure,
in
yes.
the future.
Yes. I spoke to Alec
Right,
Harris this
good,
morning.
good.
So.
Great. Moving on, there's a lot of building going on in Tarrytown and a lot of plans for
A lot
building.
more plan than than building, I think.
But
at
in
this point.
particular, the Cocoa Brothers Kaufman project up
Right.
on North Broadway is
Right.
a very big
Deal.
building.
Yes.
Big deal,
And big deal.
multi-use.
Yeah.
Um,
Not being built, obviously.
Right,
It's
just
a
being-
preliminary proposal that they floated.
So what's your reaction initially?
Dubious about whether it can, whether it will conform to what we can do. I mean, the general notion of having residential units along Broadway as part of that
A multi-use.
a multi-use thing strikes me personally as not a bad idea. It's I think it's one of the things that helps make downtown Tarrytown vibrant is that we do have people living in close proximity to the downtown and the stores. But the details are going to matter, and the issues are going to be parking and traffic, and how that all plays out remains to be seen. I mean, the preliminary proposal had a total, and there's also impacts on neighbors, the size of the buildings, and whether they will loom over existing houses and that sort of thing. But they proposed, I think it's 400 total parking spaces with 225 units of housing, mostly one bedroom and studios. And they're proposing that they would only have one space per unit.
Which means the rest would be public parking.
Yes, but they would also have a similar amount of retail space that they have now. So that space requires, and has spaces right now. I think it has in the parking lot right now, I believe the number's 121 spaces already. So theoretically, there would be an extra 54 over what you have now. But that also presumes that they're in fact correct in their assumption that the 225 units of housing will only use one space per apartment.
How do people in Tarrytown, and particular members of the village board, feel about multi-story parking units, which I guess is part of this thing?
I mean, my sense is the details are gonna matter. I don't think that there's a automatic rejection of the idea. The question is, where is it? What does it look like? How imposing is it? It's like almost every other project that comes before us or anybody is the details are, that's the only thing that really matters in many ways is what are the details? What does it look like? How big is it? How many people? Are your assumptions reasonable and correct? And I think that's one of the things we face in a lot of proposals that have been floated in recent times is how much parking. Because we have a very restrictive parking requirement, which is 2.5 spaces per unit. And it doesn't distinguish between the size of the units. and it doesn't distinguish between the placement of them. But, and it's based, I believe, I mean, it was put in place well before I was on the board, but I believe that the rationale for it is that most apartments and houses are likely to have 2 adults.
Right.
They're probably going to have 2 cars. And there's a good chance they'll have 2 cars, and then you need a half a space to accommodate guests and visitors, contractors, etc. And we've seen and it's a safe assumption, obviously. And even on the waterfront at Hudson Harbors, the planning board approved 2 spaces per unit based upon its proximity to the train station.
Right.
But at least part of that project, we know, used up every single one of the spaces, and there's concerns over whether there's any extra space.
Yeah.
And so the 2, so it's hard. The difficulty, of course, is predicting and controlling once you do it, how many cars people have. And it's out of our control once the thing, once the project is built and the parking lot's there and it's only X spaces, and then the people who move in, they have X plus 50. Well, we need a place for 50 cars. Right. So it makes it a very tough thing to do. And one of the things I normally ask for is for developers, if they have this proposal, to show us some similar examples in similar places, not in cities. It's obviously, but we're sort of a semi-urban-y but suburban location. Have there been successful examples where, in fact, you built in a small downtown that doesn't have all the services that people then, or the employment destinations, even if it's next to a train station, not everybody takes the train.
Right.
Can you show examples of places that are similar enough where we can say, okay, well, maybe there's some chance that this will work.
Yeah.
And so far, I haven't seen it,
Right.
but I'm waiting.
Okay.
But it's a big argument that happens on all this now, and people go, well, in the future, are the people going to have as many cars, and with the, the zip car phenomenon and the smart car phenomenon. And so, but at the moment, we haven't seen it.
Right.
So it makes it tough to vary those things much.
Yeah. You've got similar kinds of pressures coming, not from something within Tarrytown, but right next door with John Hudson, and the GM development is going to create all kinds of population growth and strains on the services in Tarrytown. People coming through.
Yeah, traffic.
What are you doing to prepare for that?
Well, we sued Sleepy Hollow,
right.
as most people are probably aware, but this was quite a few years, and we lost. And it was based on traffic. It was the basis of the lawsuit was that the traffic that was generated, that was projected to be generated by the project, would have largely overwhelmed the already failing intersections on Route 9. And the only proposal that they presented to mitigate that problem was basically for Tarrytown to remove parking spaces on Broadway. So they were going to create the problem. The traffic mitigation measure was us taking out parking spaces, which in fact probably wouldn't have done anything anyway. Short of making a 4-lane highway out of Broadway. Really
and one of those lanes the bicycle people want to use for a bicycle lane.
Yes, that's another issue. Right. Which and well, we can get to that if we have time. But so we said to them, "You're creating this problem. This is not a reasonable fix for this problem. We have parking pressure right now. Removing too many parking spaces makes traffic move faster, which is one of the issues which comes up at the bike lane if you remove parking. And it's just an unreasonable and unacceptable and ineffective way of dealing with the traffic. Yeah. But the court said, well, they reduced their, and before part of our argument was that you should have fewer. The only way you could really solve the problem is to have fewer units and less commercial space, particularly less retail and commercial space, which in all the traffic models generates more traffic than residents. Right. So,
but they're not interested in doing that.
They didn't. They said no, and the judge ruled. Well, they had reduced it from, I forget what the original proposal was for, I can't remember, 1,200 or 1,500 units, and they reduced it down to 1,100 and I forget 1,170, 1,130, something like that. Right. Said that was enough. He didn't buy our arguments, though. It seemed, to be honest, it really did seem incredibly compelling that just the data itself was such that they didn't really have an answer to the traffic experts saying, well, these are failing intersections, they're gonna fail worse, and what you're proposing can't be, it's not gonna work. But it's, those cases are very hard to win.
Right.
We didn't win. So now there's some minor stuff going on. We sort of settled ultimately to get we got something a little less than $400,000 to do some improvements, which is, we're gonna remove 1 or 2 spaces to make it a little bit easier to pass around some of the intersections. There are some other small measures in the area, but we don't really, it's not likely to make a big difference. We're gonna see what happens, and we're sort of stuck. It's gonna be traffic, and that's the big implication, I think, is how much traffic is produced. I don't think I've seen any other projections of other negative demands, but it's traffic.
Right.
And having part of it, having more people come into downtown to go to your restaurants. It's a good problem. It's a problem. It makes it hard because they will take their cars, so we will need the parking to accommodate them. But that's not a bad problem. So,
well, the economic growth of the village is a good problem to have.
Generally,
but as you
right.
pointed out when you talked to our paper a year ago, you have an increase. You have some pressure up on the housing and rental prices.
Absolutely.
And that you wondered whether or not too much of a good thing is going to cause a problem.
Yeah.
Since then, we've had, of course, the full effect of the reappraisal come in, and now you have the Trump tax law that limits the property tax deduction to $10,000. It doesn't look better in that regard now, does it? What's your feeling?
Well, I mean, I think the case is still out on the impact of the tax law. And, we haven't really. First of all, people haven't really absorbed it into their
it won't be till next spring.
Right. The likelihood is that will cause downward pressure on real estate prices. Right. It will make renting more attractive relative to buying. So it could cause even more pressure on the rental side, on the flip side of that is it may ease up the upward pressure on sale prices.
Right.
But the overall impact of the tax law is hard. It's very hard to gauge also because it's going to hit different people very differently, and a lot of people, depending on their own situation, if they're paying alternative minimum tax,
right,
they weren't deducting their real estate taxes already. And I think part of what took place in the last year is that a lot of people discovered that they were actually paying alternative, and they were paying alternative minimum tax, and they figured out that they weren't actually deducting their real estate. I've talked to many people who have said that, and so like Scarsdale, I think there were 2 communities in Westchester which adopted the governor's proposal for the charitable contributions, which the IRS is probably going. We don't know if they'll succeed in kicking it out, but they're kicking it out for now, and then there'll be lawsuits. But in Scarsdale, I think I heard there was only 7 people who took advantage of the proposal to make the contribution and perhaps make it. Yeah, and it looks like those who did it through August 25th may actually get the deduction because apparently the reg said anybody who does it after August 25th.
So they snuck it under the wire.
Right, sort of. Right. I mean, the way it was done, we still haven't gotten real guidance from the state on what to do. And so virtually every community, aside from Scarsdale and one other community, was really waiting to get more guidance and tools from the state or the county.
Right.
So, everybody was waiting, and then the IRS came out with its ruling saying, you really can't do this. So again, we'll have to wait to see how this progresses before we would make a determination on what to do. Okay.
The ambulance corps seems to have some financial problems, maybe even the prospect of going out of business. Right. What does the village have planned in case that happens?
Well, we've been working with the surrounding communities, which have similar issues, as well as the chief officer of Phelps, who is a very knowledgeable, active ambulance guy. He's still a volunteer ambulance member. So we met a couple of times, and he's trying to put together a plan in which we would perhaps merge under some umbrella and put all the a number of the ambulance corps together. Sleepy Hollow has issues, Irvington has issues, we have issues.
Right.
Perhaps Pleasantville has issues, but it is complicated, and it would be it won't be an easy thing to accomplish, and we're not sure what that will be.
But something like a regional ambulance.
Perhaps that's where we're looking at it. It's far from an absolute. And there are from what I understand, there are private operators around the area who would probably move in and take over some of the use. And Greenberg has its EMS service and ambulance service, so that's another possibility. Is that Greenberg might take over some of the role, which they already do stuff here. I think when there's emergency service, high level, their technicians often come.
Right.
And then the county has, I forgot what it's called now, but there's a county-based service that I believe comes out of the medical center.
Right.
So, but we've been talking about it, but again, there's no answer at this point.
Getting short on time.
Yes.
But we've got Halloween coming up.
Right.
Speaking of strain on services,
yes.
That's always a strain on services.
Yeah.
It's great for
Yeah.
the local economy.
Yeah.
You anticipate any problems, or are you ready for the onslaught?
Yeah, I think they've been. I think the police department, the DPW, they've been. They kind of have it down pretty well. And obviously, if you're trying to drive through Tarrytown when the Halloween parade is on, it's going to be a problem.
You ain't going nowhere.
But, right. So, it's continually grows, although I think it's sort of almost hit a peak at this point. It's sort of no more room, unless something changes dramatically. So I think they have their routine down as to what to do, I don't think there's been any, there's a greater risk of problems. I think that they've done a good job. People have had a great time. It's sort of worked pretty smoothly. I don't think there's been any real. As far as I know, nobody's ever said, stop doing this is terrible.
And Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow have become a destination
yes,
for this
indeed.
thing, which is really quite interesting.
Yeah.
Where do they stay? I mean, there's the DoubleTree.
Yeah, we have obviously we have our hotels, right. And probably my guess is that there's probably somewhat limited from far away visitors, although I think there are some. But and obviously we do have the hotels. So that if they're looking for hotels, it's we have quite a few rooms in the area,
right.
As it happens.
On 119.
Yeah. The DoubleTree and Tarrytown House down on 119, so not that far away. So, and my understanding, not that I have the data down, is that in general the hotels in our area, their primary business is the business of business travel during the week. So I think they generally have room on the weekends, although I believe that Halloween breaks that mold. Right. Actually, I think they fill up on Halloween time, so that's what I've heard. But.
So last question, which all of our viewers are anxious to find out is, what do you plan on wearing for Halloween?
I don't know. I'm always very last minute, so
I don't have a routine that you.
No, I've switched up. Sometimes I've gone back to old ones, so it's been.
Gone back to what?
I've gone back to an old costume, so I don't know. I'll have to see what it. I haven't made a decision on that yet.
We'll be sure to get a photograph.
Yes,
when it happens.
Indeed.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, Mayor Fixell, thank you for joining us today. It's been, I think, very informative, and we'll see what happens with the ambulance corps and with the buildings and with that tower.
Cell tower, Cell tower. God.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.